Hey there, welcome to the Reinsurance Podcast, the place where we dive into all things reinsurance, the coolest part of insurance. We're your hosts, Jared and Ben, a couple of ex-practitioners who loved the industry so much we founded Supercede to tackle some of its biggest headaches. And we're here to share our insights and stories with expert guests as we uncover what's really going on in the industry.
Welcome to the show, Nick Hoadley, who is the CEO of Insurance Search, and not just that, but another podcast host.
Yeah.
So Nick, tell us about your podcast as well and how you have managing that alongside Insurance Search.
Well, as you know, it's very difficult to run a podcast and a business at the same time. So feel your pain there. But, yeah, great. Well, thanks first of all for having me on the show. Big fan of the Reinsurance podcast. Really like what you guys are doing. As an industry, I think it's great just to share as much as we can, a lot of information. So yeah, keep up the good work. So Insurance Search, we help insurance businesses grow, increase their productivity, increase their performance through executive search, through human capital consultancy, through market intelligence studies. And we work predominantly in the US, actually. So a lot of our work's in the US, a lot of our work's international, Bermuda, APAC region. But we're actually based here in London. So,
how did you get started in the U.S. market from a London footprint?
That's a great question.
Just response to the market demand, I guess.
Absolutely. So very much like reinsurance, big global market, the insurance world. And we were doing a lot of work for clients here in the UK, and they had very similar teams and very similar challenges over there in the US. So, we started getting calls to say, can you help out in our Chicago office? Can you help out New York, Boston? And it just grew from there.
Yeah.
We now do a lot of work in Bermuda, and that's the same path, the same trajectory has been, doing some good work for people, and people just, asking us if that's transferable to those different markets.
And so then how did a podcast come out? So the Insurance Coffee House podcast emerges in parallel? Is it sort of by day and podcast by night?
I don't remember if you recall 2020, the pandemic.
Oh, vaguely.
Yeah.
Trying to
all a bit hazy.
So the executive recruiting, the executive search market took a big downturn during that time. The podcast had been something that we'd wanted to do for a long time, but we were just so busy in the business that we just never quite got around to it. But what we really wanted to do was give back to the insurance professionals, the insurance leaders that we work with, and really give them an opportunity to develop their careers and learn more from C-suite executives, from people who had made it to the top of the industry, and see what advice they had for those up and coming insurance leaders. So that was 2020. Went very well. We had a lot of great feedback, and we really developed the podcast from there. So we had the first season was a global insurance season, where navigating the travails of corporate life at a big global insurance businesses. And then we took that step further and actually realized that the guests could actually use the platform as an opportunity to talk about their business, the culture at their business, what opportunities they have. From a blank slate. So there's a lot of perception in the market. We know it's a very small market within a global arena, and people have different perceptions about different organizations. But what we really found was it was an opportunity for people really to tell their own story on the business. And that worked super well. So we were working with mid-market insurance brokers, mid-market carriers right across the US. And, by understanding that your career and your career development is a lot different at a smaller firm than it is at a big corporate, we managed to give a lot of insights and value.
Nice. Am I right in understanding as well that you've got like a 10 killer question kind of format as well? Because that sounds quite interesting to get the same framework, but then very different answers, presumably.
Yeah. So what we really wanted to do was to, we had this great opportunity to interview these amazing executives, these CEOs of global companies. And what we wanted to see were the patterns and the traits that made them successful. So yeah, very much in those early series, it was, going through similar sets of questions and seeing what patterns came out of it. Our last series, so we recently finished an InsurTech series where we were looking about technology, educating the insurance market about what technology was out there. So, platforms like yourself sort of educating the market about those opportunities there, but also providing some education and consultancy really on career moves between insurance and InsurTech back to insurance, what recommendations we had, interviewing people who'd made that switch very much like yourselves from corporate environment to startup environment. And in our latest series, we're actually currently on a people and culture series. So we've interviewed a lot of CEOs, a lot of founders, and they will tell us that the next year they're going to hire 1,000 people or they're going to double in size. And so on this series, we've actually taken a bit of a pause at this point and said, right, how do you go about doing that? Yeah, how do you build a great company? How do you hire great staff? How do you retain that staff? How do you build a great culture? We look at areas around DE&I, succession planning, remote working. And so we take much more of a deep dive. So in this current series, we still have the sort of the top and tail structure.
Yeah.
But we take a bit of a deep dive and see what's working for those individual businesses.
It's super interesting. We've talked a lot about on our podcast, and I'm sure you have as well, about sort of the talent challenges our industry has had, and how do we attract young talent, and how do you sort of build career progression, especially now in remote working and these types of things. But that sort of framework is super interesting because you have an opportunity to learn from like industry leaders around what's made them successful and like build that sort of aspirational ambition for individuals. You allow them to get an idea of like opportunities beyond just going to work at a big firm and doing that for your career, but there's InsurTech that sits alongside this. You can move between those things you could over time if that was of interest. And then in this most recent one, again, a sort of a double dip into like, what are the types of cultures you might want to go work at as you're sort of looking at a career in the industry? What are the things that inspire you and excite you, and you use that to kind of curate where you might want to go work as well, because cultures are different for different reasons, and you want some align more for certain individuals than with others. So it's like a fascinating journey that a listener would sort of go through listening through the sort of library of your episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point about the culture is a great one. And the biggest feedback that I get from my guests is, this is the culture, this is what we're building. If the talent like that, the talent are bought into that, fantastic. But if they're not, that's fine. And there's other opportunities in the market. We work with very fast-growing insurtechs, and we also work with deeply rooted insurance mutuals. Very different pace of life. But for our candidates, not all candidates want to work at, a high-growth insurtech. Not all candidates want to work in a very sedate environment like an insurance mutual. So I think it's great that we managed to discuss those different options and different opportunities, because there's such a broad range of talent out there, and people want different things. It's about giving them those options.
Do you think people or firms, I guess, succeed in differentiating their voice in this market for potential employees? Because obviously there's some standard things that people will say, oh, we're a great friendly place to work and we're the best at whatever. But do you find people are able to say, especially post-pandemic, when there's things like how often you have to come into the week, is somebody saying, actually, we're this type, you should come to us if you like this, versus actually we're different to them, we're more like that? How well do people do that?
I think there's a few companies who do it very well and they hire brilliantly, but I think a lot of companies are struggling with that. Particularly, obviously, the larger organisations, it's more difficult. But I think that clarity is what certainly the generation of talent coming through now want. Is what they expect. They want to know what type of business they're joining. But I think if you look across the industry, and obviously I keep a very close eye on it, until I interview some people or until they become a client of us as a firm, I've actually I don't have a particular perception about them one way or the other. So I think there's a lot more that can be done about that.
Yeah. And are there particular issues that are coming out more and more? I know we talked about remote working already, but we probably should talk about that a bit more. But ESG, for example, are people looking to work for firms that are seen as good actors, or are people looking for firms that are more techy, or how do you see that playing out at the moment?
It is different for the individual, for sure. But I think, certainly firms, certainly people are looking for an organization that they can really get behind, and really feel part of something that aligns with their values. So have been very clear on value alignment all the way through the interview process is very, very important. So we see that, a lot.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important sort of roles that the recruiters play is understanding like the personality and the ambitions and the sort of things that will resonate with a candidate and aligning them with companies and cultures that fit. Because you're right, like there's a huge array of differences, and that's all fine. But like a good fit is where like what you want to achieve and the culture you want to thrive in and are drawn to, and using that sort of understanding of who that candidate is and how the companies want to structure and recruit different types of people is like a primary driver for those being successful matches. And I think you obviously are doing it quite well given the sort of success you've had.
Yeah, well, I think that's the key to it. I mean, we work with, some global corporations, and then we work with some mid-market players. One of the searches we've conducted recently is for a 30-man specialty insurance carrier in Tennessee. So very, very niche. Yeah. But clearly a firm like that's looking for people who are entrepreneurial, people who are going to really drive the business forward. Yeah. And so very quickly when you're speaking to a candidate or you're searching for candidates, that's the key part of the role. It's not necessarily the technical side of things. That's sort of taken as a given, but it's really the personality and the opportunity that will provide someone. Why are they going to leave a company like Liberty Mutual or Travelers and all the trappings that come with that to come and join a 30-man startup. You've really got to know really what their aspirations are and align that.
Yeah. You mentioned before, obviously the US footprint that you guys have grown, but also clients in Asia and elsewhere. What is the biggest challenge you face if a client comes to you and says, we're opening up a new office in Hong Kong, we want you to help us staff this team up? Like, it feels like a heavy lift having never done this job.
It's a heavy lift.
What does that look like?
Well, we love that. We really enjoy that. I mean, one of the things that we would do, so if, and we've done it for numerous clients in the US where they've got a strong presence on the East Coast, and they say, right, we're going to open up in California. Can you help us find some people there? Now, number one, normally those insurance underwriters or brokers or those leaders there probably don't have a perception of that company on the East Coast. They don't have a strong reputation in Los Angeles or wherever it might be. So actually the first thing that we do is we create a podcast with them, telling the story about the business and the opportunities there. And then we can go into that location. Before we start the search, we actually place that podcast in front of that insurance talent as a value add. Very much, it's an opportunity for you to listen to a C-suite leader, maybe when you're going to the gym or you're on your way to the office, some great learnings about insurance. And then it's amazing how many people then come back to us and reach out to us and say, hey, Nick, that was a great podcast. That guest was fantastic. Their company sounds awesome. Yeah. And we say, well, yeah, funny that they're actually recruiting at the moment and they're trying to grow in your particular region. So often when we're looking at land and expand opportunities like that, we use podcasts as a media to do it.
Very clever.
Nice. And then one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because it's something that the industry has not got the best reputation on historically, is the DEI side of things. I think we've had some brilliant successes here in London, for example, with the Dive-In Festival and various other initiatives to bring more diverse talent into the market. How has that topic progressed, and looking at this on a much more global scale? Are firms doing the right things? What are talent looking for here from an employer as well?
I mean, it's a big challenge, and there's not one secret answer to it for sure. We've just conducted some analysis for a global reinsurance broker around particularly on gender diversity, and we're seeing that there's a lot of female reinsurance professionals coming into the market, but they're not making it into those senior leadership positions. So there's a big disparity there. So what can we do about that? So I think, number one, we can try to attract as many candidates into the industry to start with. I think insurance is definitely an industry that when you're at school, university, you don't particularly consider. I think reinsurance probably even more so. I think there's a lot of people in insurance who don't understand what reinsurance is, let alone the wider population.
We did actually have an email earlier today from somebody in insurance. I don't know if you saw this.
Yeah.
Asking, do people in reinsurance get paid more? That was the
Yes.
first thing they wanted to know about reinsurance. But
So the answer on the podcast
Yes.
is that, yeah. So there you
That's
have
why
it.
it's a closed shop.
Yeah, exactly. It's the walled garden of reinsurance.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So I think that's number one. I think we've got to try and attract as many people into the industry as we possibly can, and a lot of that is education and appealing to people much earlier stages in their career. Number two, organizations have got to look at how they manage different talent pools and how they can really help people flourish from all sorts of different backgrounds. And I think that's really key. Certainly as an executive search practitioner, I would be very wary about moving a diverse candidate who is likely to be very happy where they are, performing well, into a new environment if we didn't think that they were going to succeed and it wasn't just a tick box exercise. So that's crucial. And then the third thing is really, and I think this is something that companies can deal with right now, is about their talent attraction process, making that much more accessible, making that much more unbiased. Taking, we've worked with businesses before where they say their number one priority is DE&I, bringing more diverse talent into their company, and then we ask them how they go about recruiting.
Yeah,
and they say, well, it's through referrals.
Yeah. I mean, it's completely true, Ray. And I saw this the other day, and I can't name names because I can't even remember who it was. I think this was a year ago, or maybe longer, but it's stayed with me. Somebody on LinkedIn, I posted about the fact that somehow there's somebody who worked in the industry posted about somehow my relative, my child, I think it was, hasn't been able to find a job in the industry. This seems like a travesty. We need to get more diverse talent into the industry. So my son is going to bring that, which was a bit questionable to begin with. But then, astonishingly, this post was responded to by a HR person from within the industry, who I would have thought would have been, the person who could put up a bit of a, well, we actually do have to follow a process to make sure we're, finding the best talent from and looking at all the best places. But then the HR person said, oh, let me see what I can do. I'll have a look and see if we've got any roles going for your son. I was like, really? Like, is that still the way we do things? So yeah,
nepotism does not drive a lot of DE&I, I'll be honest.
It doesn't help at all. Yeah, I think the key thing that companies can look at straight away is that process of hiring people. So whether that's they're using referrals at the moment, maybe they're using sort of like quite traditional search firms, the types of firms you rely on a little black book of contacts, people that they move around from company to company. They might be hanging around Leadenhall Market. They might be at all the spots that you'd expect networking to take place. But you've got to really think about the wider talent pool, and you might have some great leaders, you might have some great practitioners who are just not in those circles at all, due to their home circumstances or whatever it might be. So really it's about properly looking at the market every time you have a search. So if you're looking for a chief underwriting officer, it's very important to map out the entire market of potential candidates and then reach out to all of those individuals about the role and give them all the same access to that opportunity. So not just the guys who you play golf with, not just the guys who are at the happy hours on a Friday evening, but actually the whole market, and make that as inclusive as possible. And it's great from a DEI standpoint, but the number one thing is you're increasing that talent pool maybe from 50 people to 100 people. You're going to get a better quality candidate at the end of it, and that's driving up standards of the industry. And it means you're going to get a better chance of bringing in a diverse candidate as well. So I don't think the end goal should always be just to hire someone because they're diverse by all means, but I think it's just opening up opportunities to the whole market. And I think there's lots of ways that we can do that. There's lots of tools out there now which can make job posting much more neutral in terms of language. There's much more ways that we can appeal to people, and if we can keep that unbiased approach, I think we've got a lot better chance than if we're just moving around the same people from the same backgrounds.
Yeah, there's a couple phases, isn't there? There's that sort of pre-candidate phase. We were having a conversation earlier this week around the usage of like TikTok and things as a way to get people who are in their mid to late teens and they're starting to think about what they might do, bringing insurance into that conversation, which might not have been on any of their radars. Like that alone is going to help increase the range of talent pool that comes in as grads and similar.
Yeah.
And then the second stage is kind of what you're talking about now is, and as we then start to let them find roles and increase in rank and we move them across companies, like how do we increase the sort of pool of candidates at each of those stages? Because the bigger the pool there, it's the same way the bigger the pool at the front will just create a more representative pool of candidates that reflects society in a more impactful way.
Yeah, more representative and just a better quality outcome.
Yeah.
I think for any company, when they're recruiting, if you're interviewing 10 candidates, you can be so much more thorough in your recruiting than if you've got one or two candidates that someone's referred to you or might have worked with previously. Yeah. I think there's a lot of challenges that we have as an industry around that. And you might be hiring, you might think it's a safe bet because it's a referral, but that person might be a 7 out of 10, a steady player. But if you really want to drive the growth in the business, you want to see what else is out there. Yeah. You could hire someone with a lot more skills and capabilities.
Yeah. Well, as an employer, just on that, I think you should want it to be a hard process. You should want to be like 4 candidates that you really like. And you're trying to like battle internally, like which one of the it shouldn't be like of the 2, this one's not as bad as the other, and off you go, right? Yeah. You should kind of lean into that being a tough decision at the end because the pool is broad enough and the quality that comes to the top is sufficiently high.
I mean, further challenges in reinsurance, obviously, is the size of the deals at place, and if someone leaves an organisation, generally you need to fill that position pretty quickly. There's large stakes involved. Yeah. But we do look at the analysis around hiring quickly, and again, that can have a negative effect on gender diversity for sure. So having a process which is thorough, moves with speed, but is not moving too quickly that you're just appointing someone because they're available or because they're known.
Yeah.
Really scanning the market, making sure you've got the best person.
Yeah. And you mentioned skills and capabilities. Have you seen what people are looking for change as well in terms of it not just being that smaller pool of like, somebody who knows everyone and has been in the same industry this whole time, which sometimes is like, if you're a senior marine rebreaker, there's quite a small list of people in that category. Are people on the hiring side willing to look further beyond as maybe, they know how to code in R, or they're from another industry? Are people looking more broadly, and are people in those broader talent pools interested in applying?
I think the industry's trying, but I think it can often be a safe place to recruit on experience rather than skills. Yeah. I think a lot of middle managers particularly, if they've depends what their motivation is. If they're under pressure to hit next quarter's targets, then they might just hire someone who can do the job based on their experience. If they do have more time to develop people, then certainly the skills around technology, we're seeing that is becoming more key. Some of the clients that we work with now, they like to bring in the very junior people in the business into their management meetings and just let them sit in the background and then just key in with any insights that they have about technology and how that might be able to help them in their decision making, because often the people at the top often don't know what they don't know around technology. And some of these guys, some of these grads or people out of school and college, it's just second nature to them. And I think that's very important.
You can imagine somebody who's just come off a computer science degree, like listening to something somebody says and just like giggling in the background. What's so funny? Well, what you said is technically that's not the internet that you've just described.
Are there specific sort of roles or role levels that you found more difficult than others, or are they from your perspective, are they all relatively the same, or it's like these projects are much more complicated because of whether it has to get approved by a different, there's going to be golden handcuffs in play, or what? Or are they all relatively stable?
I mean, the majority of the markets we work in are the specialty markets where traditionally that's the smallest talent pool available, and that's why a company would like to bring in a search partner like us, because it is a needle in a haystack search. and that's what we enjoy doing. And, that's where we provide value.
In those kind of scenarios, do you ever get caught in a merry-go-round where you can kind of see what's about to happen? Because there's 10 firms that are brilliant at this thing, and so you get somebody leaves from one of them, and then that person you go and poach from somewhere else because that's the only place you can pick from, and then that place now needs a new person, so then you poach from the next one, and so on. It just goes round and round.
So I think that's traditionally happened.
Yeah.
But as a business, like I was saying earlier, we try and be as transparent as possible and inclusive as possible. And normally our talent pools are, 100 people and more, rather than just having a small niche group of people. And we do try and expand that out in terms of skills as much as we can. And there are occasions, different geographies where it can be more of a challenge. But in this day and age, we encourage the clients, if they can hire the best talent and it's remote or hybrid. We can have that option as well. Sometimes the client will say, look, we've got a search at the moment in Kansas City, not a huge insurance market there. And we're going to give them a couple of options. Do you want the very best person in Kansas City? This is what this person looks like. But here's what the best person in Chicago, best person in New York looks like. What is the priority for you as the client? Is it having the team local? Or is it having the best person? And for some companies, that will be different.
Does that sometimes include relocation and maybe even like visa sponsorship and these types of things as well? If you have a candidate in the U.S. who's going to be an amazing fit for this syndicate here in London or similar, do you get get involved with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Bermuda is a big one.
Yeah, sure.
We're starting to do quite a lot of work out there, and very much looking at local markets first, and then looking at wider opportunities, whether that's bringing in people from the UK, Canada. It's the first option. That's normally the number one priority when you're looking at things like tax and relocation and that sort of things. And then looking at bringing in people from the States. So, the world is becoming more, we're becoming more closely connected. And so, there are opportunities for people, to be working in North America, but being based in London, and vice versa.
Yeah. Do you ever... I'm always curious about this with Bermuda in particular, given its relatively small population size and need for external jobs.
In affinity to the podcast.
And the fact that there's a very large fan base of the podcast there. But in those kind of scenarios where, let's say, you help somebody relocate, senior underwriter moves to Bermuda, and then they're like, but what will my husband do? For example, is there then a parallel search process that goes on to see if there's an opportunity for like a family member to become whatever they do normally back home?
And that's often the biggest challenge and the most important issue, is to make sure that the partner's happy with the move and the opportunity. If one person's being sponsored in to an organisation, if they don't happen to work in insurance and reinsurance in somewhere like Bermuda, then the career opportunities are quite limited for the partner. So that's crucial. Speaking to some of our clients, the biggest reason that it doesn't work out is 12 months, 18 months is, well, my partner just couldn't end up getting a job, or my partner just couldn't get a good feel for the place. So that is really key. But I think that's a great idea, though. If you can help get them a job as well, that would make things a lot easier. But a market like Bermuda is pretty tough. Obviously, depending on the background that the partner has, it'd be quite difficult. But
it's kind of an anomaly as well in like global job markets. One that's almost entirely a single sector. It doesn't really exist anywhere else in the world, I don't think, with the same density of singular industry, mono-industrial.
And that is, let's be honest, the reason why this podcast is so popular, right? I think
exactly.
A large reinsurer is the island's largest employer. I don't think there's anywhere else, maybe a few cities in Europe where a reinsurer is the largest employer. But otherwise,
so I imagine you get mobbed when you go to Hamilton and walk down.
It's like the Beatles coming up.
When you walk down Front Street.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Hey, the podcast guys are here.
Yeah, exactly. Besides reinsurance, what is the other sort of your favorite sector? Is it the specialty stuff? Is it the big agency stuff? Is it taking people internationally as they're beginning to grow? Like, what is this thing that like the clients that you're most excited by because they're doing a thing that you're really keen on helping them grow with?
Yeah, so I mean, I love the specialty markets because you are really providing a lot of value to your client because they are really finding it hard to bring in top talent. So yeah, number one. Some recent search we've done. We've recently placed COO and a CTO for an amazing insurtech in New York. Being, working that sort of level with candidates who are going to have a huge impact on those companies is very exciting. It's very interesting. We get to learn a lot. I mean, as part of being a search practitioner, but also, running the business insurance search, it's always about learning from the people that you're working with or interviewing on a podcast. So, a great opportunity to speak to some of the best business leaders, let alone insurance leaders in the world. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah. You sometimes forget how human everyone is, don't you?
Yeah.
Get to have a nice chat with them. They've got hobbies and lives outside of being...
Especially in insurance, right?
Yeah.
People are just... I mean, some of the guys that we recruited into our firm, they had different backgrounds in executive search. They've moved from some other industries, particularly some of the technology markets, and they're always blown away about how friendly people are in insurance and how approachable they are. And I think that's something that we never want to take away from the industry.
Yeah, we're fortunate as well on this podcast. We get a number of sort of high-profile guests that come on and just have very candid conversations. The format obviously is just very conversational, and some of them are very uncomfortable with that initially because they're used to saying, "Here's the pre-prepared questions you're going to answer," etc. But once they come into it, as Ben said, like they're just people who want to talk about stuff that they've done in their careers or things that excite them about the young talent coming in and where the business in the industry is going. So. It's always quite fun to have those conversations on a more candid kind of structure.
And it's just a great opportunity to share that with the wider world. I know on our podcast, our first series, we were asking our guests what their biggest failure was in business, and asking them that as the CEO of a major corporation. Obviously, it was quite uncomfortable, but the guard then comes down, and they open up more, and you really see them as people, and that's great to share. I think with the wider market, because often people think that the C-suite are in ivory towers and they're not in touch, but I think it's great to see that we're all going through the same challenges. They've got a life outside of work as well, outside of reinsurance, outside of the insurance industry, and it's great to see. It's great to tell the story.
Yeah, very cool.
Oh, well, fabulous having you on the show, Nick. It's been a real pleasure diving into the world of recruitment, and we'll be sure to listen into a number of your episodes on Insurance Coffee House podcast. We're excited for that one.
Yeah,
and
we have a huge audience of ours is people coming into the industry and using us to sort of get up to speed. So if you're in that category, please click the show notes, find Nick's podcast as well, because there's a ton of great content there to help you explore the industry, get tucked in, and sort of see what your next role might look like. So thank you again for your time. This has been an excellent conversation.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we'll see you in a few years, I'm sure, as the podcast continues to grow.
Absolutely. When we need to establish the Bermuda team.
That's it.
Exactly.
Give me a call.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.